If you're interested in learning about how many layers of fiberglass it might take when you're rebuilding your transom, floor, stringers, bow deck, etc., you have come to the right episode. Now, if you're new to the channel, I'd like to welcome you guys. My name is Joe Buskins. This is our family's boat shop, second generation professional boat builder and a 100-ton licensed captain. And we've got hundreds of videos here on our channel showing all about different ways to apply and build fiberglass. And a lot of times when we make a video, it's based on the comments and requests I get from you folks that are watching. And that's kind of how we came to this episode. Now, as a prelude to it, we did some videos on laying up different types of fiberglass and how much resin it consumed. And then we did some videos on applying 1, 2, 3, 4 different layers of material and how much thickness it would yield. But a lot of comments on how many layers do I put in my transom? How many layers do I put on my floor? Now, I'm gonna kind of front load this video with telling everybody that basically every boat is different. So I can't tell you specifically in every situation how many layers, but what this is going to be about is a generality for you folks based on, for example, when we built our big 29 footer, I'm going to show you a cutout from the transom and tell you how many layers we put on the floor and then kind of scale up or down. When we built the transom on our 29 footer, I want to show y'all a big heavy duty cutout that we've got here just to explain how, if you're new to fiberglass, a lot of times there's different layers and not all materials are gonna apply in the same place. So we usually sequence these in a way that's gonna give us the most strength for the least weight, and then obviously consumption. We don't wanna waste materials where they're unnecessary. Now, I will tell you folks that the primary material that we used when we were building our 29 was the 1708 biaxial. The 1708 runs at a 45. They make an 1808 that runs at a 90. What I like about the 1708, it has the CSM or chop strand mat on the back side so that you only cut one piece and you actually get like 2 layers in essence. Now, when I was growing up, we used what we call CSM or chop strand mat and woven roven. Now, it's a good idea to have a basic understanding of the material so that when I show you how many layers, you would know what I'm talking about. Now, if you want to learn more about fiberglass materials and cutting and handling them, we do have videos here on the channel showing that as well. Matter of fact, I know I'm jumping around a bit, so y'all work with me. I'm trying to show you as much cool stuff as possible. We have a cutting table, and I recommend if you're doing a big project, if you can have some kind of a flat surface where you can roll material out. We've actually got a stand here with some rollers, and we can put different rolls of material. Matter of fact, we even got some peel ply laid out on the table, and it's nice to have an option for that if you can. So keep that in mind, because that's another question we get is how do we manage our fiberglass materials? So a nice flat surface is a good idea. So with all that being said, if you come over here closer, you can see that we've got several layers of glass there, and that is right at 1/4 inch thick. That is going to be 6 layers of your biaxial fabric, which is very, very strong per unit. You know, it's a high strength material. It's much stronger than just the CSM, for example. But the CSM is very good at gluing and bonding layers of material together or making initial bonds. So I hope the camera will pick it up, right in there, you can see there's a little layer of fiberglass between our layers of Coosa board. That is going to be a couple layers of 1.5 ounce CSM to help glue those pieces of Coosa together. And then again, as you zoom in, we've actually got 4 layers of CSM and then 6 more layers of 1708 and then 2 layers of 1.5 ounce CSM on the skin coat. And it's again, it can seem like a lot to take in, but if you guys wanted to jump back, we've got videos when we were building our 29 footer, and we also have a transom replacement video that shows us layering that. And you want to use the right materials in the right place. So there's rarely one material that's going to cover all the bases. Now, generally, again, when I am doing a project, I like to start with a CSM. It holds a lot of resin and it's very good at conforming, and it works best with vinyl esters and polyester resins. CSM here in the stateside doesn't work that great with epoxy. Epoxy doesn't have the same solvents within the resin, and it doesn't dissolve the CSM and allow it to melt and conform. Now, if you We have a lot of viewers in the UK and in Australia, and if you're fortunate enough to live there, you can probably specify a powder binder or a CSM with a powder binder, and it'll work just fine with epoxy resin. Now, when we're talking about strength too, like if you want to build the strongest possible laminate, you want to combine the strongest fabrics and the strongest resins. So again, going back to the CSM, it's a good glue, but it's these little short fibers that don't extend very far, and for the amount of resin it consumes and the strength it yields, it's not the strongest material, but it needs to be used in conjunction with like a woven. You would alternate matte, CSM first, woven, CSM, so on and so forth. Now obviously the 1708 already has the CSM integrated, and this is compatible with epoxy. Now when we talk about resin strength, for example, our 29 was built out of an iso polyester resin, which if you're wondering what your boat is built out of, I would probably say 98% of all production boats, unless it's a high performance boat or an ultra lightweight craft, it is probably not going to be vinyl ester or epoxy. It is most likely a polyester. Now we source all of our polyesters and vinyl esters from Fiberglass Warehouse. They have everything you need if you want to build a boat, repair a boat, everything from our fabrics and cores and resins, and they do offer a Fish Bump TV discount code, and it's a substantial savings for you folks. So give them a call, check out their website. They've got all kind of resources on there to help you decide what you might need for your DIY project, and use that Fish Bump TV discount code to save you folks some money. But polyester is good, but if you wanted to go stronger, you would upgrade to a vinyl ester, which if you've been following the channel, you'll see that we use it in a lot of our projects. It bonds very tenaciously to new surfaces. It handles temperature very well, and it has very good elongation properties, which means it'll bond to the surface, and then as the boat or your RV or whatever you're repairing flexes and twists and moves, it hangs on and then will come back into place. It's also compatible with Gelcoat, which if you don't know what Gelcoat is or want to learn more about it, again, we have multiple videos here in the channel. If you kind of just scroll back through the video library, you might be really nicely surprised at what you find. So the point of all that is that if you built a 1/4 inch thick laminate using, say, polyester and the CSM, not that that's a bad thing, and there may be applications where that's totally adequate, but it's not going to be nearly as strong as you built if you used a 1/4 inch laminate using a vinyl ester resin with your 1708 biaxial. Now, one reason the biaxial is stronger, and I mentioned the short fibers on your CSM, same with the woven, you have these long strands that run the full length of whatever length you cut your strip of material. So if you've got a continuous length of biaxial or woven running down the bottom, it distributes that load, and these fibers are amazingly strong. They transmit that load. So that's where people get confused sometimes as far as which material is best for which application. If you're just trying to seal some plywood up and you want a nice cosmetic finish, a couple layers of CSM could work very good. If you want to strengthen a union between some plywood, you would want to integrate either some woven or some of the 1708 or 1808 alternated with the CSM to give it more strength. So you need to blend the two. It's like you folks maybe that are in construction, like if you've poured concrete, a lot of times there's going to be a wire mesh or rebar in there to help strengthen it. So the concrete helps the rebar helps the concrete, and together it's optimal. One alone versus the other alone may not be the best scenario for gaining the maximum strength. Now, if we were, say for example, I did a little mock-up for you folks. This would represent maybe the floor of a boat. Although that's wood, most hulls would be fiberglass, and you may have a stringer of sorts. And we normally recommend doing some kind of what we call a fillet or a radius there to help your fiberglass bend or transition. That's another thing that'll make your fiberglass stronger, is radiusing surfaces, not only in the inside corners, but on the top side corners. Now this one is a sharp edge, and you wouldn't want that, but I'll show you the little tool that we use a lot here in the shop. And again, we've got other videos where we're using this little router, and you've got this little radius bit, generally about the radius of a grown man's finger, give or take. That will allow the fiberglass fabric to bend over it without putting a crease or a corner in it. If you have a hard corner, it's going to compromise the strength of your fiberglass and therefore your whole project. So working smart and working efficiently has a lot to do with how strong your project turns out. Now, in most cases, like with stringer replacements, I know that's very, very popular for everybody. 3 layers of a heavy fabric is probably going to do the job. Now, again, we use a lot of the 1708 biaxial because you cut one piece of fabric and you get the CSM and the heavy strands. If you have the woven roven, you would alternate. When I say 3 layers, that would mean 3 layers of the roven alternated with 3 layers of the CSM. CSM first, roven, CSM, roven, CSM, roven. That's going to give you the strength you need. Now, typically, there's a couple ways this can be done, and there's 2 schools of thought, 2 trains of thought on this. You'll notice these are progressively, we have a small one, a medium one, and a long one, and we're staggering where they overlap. That creates a nice transition and eliminates what we call a hard point. You would never want to cut all of your strips the same width and then stack them consecutively where they end at the same place. It can create a flex point in the bottom of the boat and a potential failure. So you always want to stagger or run those out gradually. That's something that'll also make your fiberglass work be stronger and look better. Now, again, some folks will stagger from largest to smallest, but if you do that, you're going to see the seam of each one of these edges. And a lot of times when you put fiberglass on there, it's going to create some little splinters and some edges. Now, if it's under the floor and you don't care, that's not a big deal. Traditionally, our family, and even with repair work, we have always gone smallest to largest. And what happens when you do that is each successive layer covers the seam of the previous layer. And so the end result is, instead of seeing multiple seams when you're finished, you've got this one clean transition. Now, some folks will argue the downside to that is if you've got to do any grinding or sanding there, you got to be careful. You don't want to grind too far into any of the layers, which would be the case with any kind of grinding or sanding you do. If you think you're going to do a lot of grinding or sanding and you want to have several layers of heavy fabric, what I would typically do is use 2 or 3 layers of CSM on the surface to cover that, which usually gives a nice cosmetic anyway. And then this is sacrificial. So doesn't really add that much strength. It's mostly for cosmetics, or almost, it can be used almost as like a primer or a barrier, and maybe throw a coat of CSM on there. And then if you sand into the CSM, you're not affecting the strength of the underlying heavy fabrics. So there again, you may want to do some experimenting on your own too and do some research. We're just giving you examples of what we do in our family shop. Now, something else that I recommend for people to do is maybe laminate some pieces of material. And of course, we do a lot of this here at the shop, but these are some pieces of material that I tested to failure and compared them with known samples or other materials I was interested in using or had been using, and then compared them side by side and got an idea of how strong one material was versus the other. The same like when we use core materials, for example. If you've been following the channel, you will know that when we built our fiberglass hardtop, which actually there's the orange mold for it over there, and if you're interested in building your own fiberglass parts and building molds, jump back there and check out that series of videos. But we used an Airex foam core. That's a 6.5 pound density, 3/4 inch thick, and it's perforated there so that the resin can run through it and air can vent out of it. Good material. That's a 6.5 pound density. This is some Divinycell, which has some ability to flex and move. It will not hold a screw. It's just basically a lightweight panel. We've used that some here in the channel. It's a 5.5 pound density. And then Coosa board, which is probably my favorite core to use all around. There's a big sheet of it right there. We actually use some Coosa board when we're making this panel there. You can see it sandwiched between some fiberglass. Coosa board in itself has a lot of strength. So if you're using Coosa board, the fact that it has strength and it will not rot, you may not have to put as much glass over a Coosa board surface to protect it from the elements versus if you were using plywood. Plywood, it is very important, in my opinion, to use multiple layers of like CSM or 1708. Now, when we were doing the floor in our 29, and say, for example, let's use the Divinycell, and it'll mimic the side of the boat and then the Coosa board floor that ran up to it. We used 1708 running all the way across the floor and then a couple inches up the side. Then we finished over that for a cosmetic look. We went over the 1708 with some of the CSM. Then we came back and we doubled all of that. So we actually put another layer of 1708 and another layer of CSM in the corners to double that up. And that's pretty typical in a lot of the work we do in boats. For example, when you look at the sides and the bottom intersection right in here, that is referred to as the chine of the boat. And when we were laying up this boat, we had layers that ran underneath the bottom in the mold and then layers that ran from the bottom up to the side, and they're overlapping so that everything is as strong as it can possibly be. Same goes for the transom. That cutout piece is actually this area right in here. And obviously a boat and its transom, this is probably one of the areas where you want to go extra tough. Don't skimp on materials. It takes a lot of abuse back there. So it also has a factor of how well you tie in everything. Like you'll notice this transom is not unsupported. We actually fiberglassed in the splash well, and there are vertical walls that brace it so that you don't just have a wall of heavy material. You got some cross members and supports. And again, if you want to jump back and watch the boat building series, you can see how we installed the Coosa board and even videos of us laminating the transom in together. But generally speaking, like if you're doing a plywood deck or floor, I would put at least one layer of 1708 and at least one layer of 1 ounce CSM to seal plywood at the absolute minimum, and probably preferably a 1708 and maybe even 2 CSMs. Same for corners and transitions. Generally, you would want certainly 2, 3, sometimes even 4 layers overlapping. And when you're going back to stringers, 3 layers of 1708, again, is pretty typical for most boats, say in the 20-foot range and slightly larger. If you're getting in a little small boat that doesn't go very fast, you can downsize on all your materials. Just remember, the bigger the boat is and the faster it goes, the heavier duty it needs to be. For example, on our 29, we are mostly fishing offshore, and that boat will run nearly 50 miles an hour. So for a boat that size, we have right at a 1/2 inch of fiberglass laminate. Put it at scale, that's a piece of Coosa, is right at 1/2 inch thick. So there is right at that much fiberglass just on the bottom. And then you see how heavy duty the transom is. If you've got a little 15-foot skiff with a little tiny outboard motor and you're just kind of putting around a pond nice and easy, the forces exerted on it are not near what they would be in a big offshore boat that's maybe getting airborne and coming down and hitting the water at high speed. So you kind of have to factor that in. Now, I will tell you folks, you can go online and you go like Amazon or whatever, and matter of fact, I've got some books. I may put a link in our video's description, which typically, like all the tools and materials we show here on the channel, we will have a link below our video's description for you folks at home. That's super convenient for y'all, and that does help support the channel. So, and speaking of supporting the channel, if you're finding value in the videos and the effort we're putting into these things, all these little test panels and stuff that we're doing, these aren't things that I'm using personally. We're making these videos just for you folks at home. So if you're finding value, if you could give us that thumbs up, like, share, comment, and very important to hit that subscribe button and even your little notification bell. So when we release a new video, which is typically every weekend, usually 1 or 2 new videos every weekend, that way you'll be up to speed and know when a new video comes out. So I think that's kind of the basis of things. Now, if I left something out or you're curious about something, again, a lot of our videos that we make are based on comments. So leave me a comment, let me know what you're interested in seeing, and I will try my best to respond and maybe even make a follow-up video. Sometimes we'll do a multi-part series to help you folks get your sailboat, your pontoon boat, your RV. I mean, the amount of things you can use composites for is not just limited to boats. And folks out there that have an idea of maybe something you can't buy commercially, or it's terribly expensive, to have custom parts made is going to cost a lot of money. And a lot of times you can devote some time and material cost. And like I said, you can contact the folks at Fiberglass Warehouse and or our Amazon links, and be sure to use that Fish Bump TV discount code, and you get the same kind of stuff that we're using here in our family's boat shop. So I want to thank everybody so much, our international viewers as well as our viewers here in the state. We appreciate you guys. It's Captain Joe here, Fish Bump TV. My son Logan working hard behind the scenes is my amazing cameraman, and we will catch you folks in the next episode.